The wind in Montana has a way of cutting right through you, sharp, cold, and relentless. I remember stepping out of my car, my boots crunching against the thin layer of frost on the ground, and staring at the crooked little house in front of me. My house, my so-called inheritance. A few days earlier, I was living in the city, thinking life was well, not perfect, but stable. I had a wife, a decent job, a small apartment, and the belief that, even if my parents had their favorites, we were still family. That illusion shattered the day the will was read. My brother got the family estate, a sprawling, picture-perfect mansion in the capital, worth more than I could ever dream of earning. And me, I got this thing, a run-down shack in the middle of nowhere, so far off the map I had to use a printed road atlas to even find it. When the lawyer finished reading, my brother gave me that smirk, the one I'd seen since we were kids. The one that said, "You'll always be second place." My wife didn't even wait until we got home to start in on me. "You just sat there and took it. You didn't fight for what you deserve. God, you're pathetic." Her voice was low, but every word landed like a punch. That night, she told me not to come back until I grew a spine. So here I was, a duffel bag in the back seat, a half tank of gas, and nothing left in my name but this leaning pile of wood in Montana. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, wondering if maybe this was rock bottom. But the truth, I had no idea how far the bottom really went, or how far this place was about to take me. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips. The windows were clouded with years of dirt and dust. The roof sagged like it had given up years ago. Still, I walked up to the front door. The key they'd given me was old, its metal dark and pitted. It didn't slide in smoothly, I had to jiggle it, push my shoulder against the door. And when it finally gave, it swung open with a slow, aching groan. The air inside hit me first, that heavy, stale smell of a place that's been shut tight for too long. Dust motes floated in the thin light, coming through a crack in the curtains. I stepped in, my boots stirring up little clouds from the floor. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you, and that's when I saw it. It was small, barely noticeable at first, but there was something about it that made my chest tighten. An old photograph, framed and hanging crooked on the far wall. Only I wasn't in it. I took a few slow steps toward the photograph, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The frame was coated in a thin layer of dust, the kind that only settles after years of being untouched. The picture showed my parents, smiling in front of a house I didn't recognize, with my brother standing proudly beside them. He looked maybe 18, there, tall, confident, wearing the kind of grin you only get when you know you're the center of attention. But the space where I should have been, empty, like I'd been cropped out of the memory before it was even made. I don't know why it hit me so hard. It wasn't like I wasn't used to being the afterthought. Growing up, my brother got the brand new bike for Christmas, while I got his old one with the seat ripped open. He got the expensive sports camp in the summer. I got the fun of staying home to mow the lawn. But this photo, it felt different. It was as if they'd built an entire memory without even considering I might belong in it. I reached up and took the frame down, feeling the grit of dust stick to my fingers. Behind it, I noticed something strange, the faint outline of a square in the wallpaper, like there had once been another picture there. Something had been removed. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining it, and set the frame on a side table. The table itself wobbled under the weight, one of its legs missing a chunk of wood. The place was like that, every surface tired, every corner sagging under years of neglect. I wandered deeper into the house, my boots creaking on warped floorboards. The living room led into a small kitchen where the sink was full of rust, and the cabinets hung open like broken jaws. A single plate sat in the dish rack, covered in dust, like whoever left it there thought they'd come back in a day or two but never did. Everywhere I looked, I felt the same mix of abandonment and something else. Like this house wasn't just forgotten, it was hiding. I found myself standing in a narrow hallway, the kind that made you feel like the walls were leaning in on you. At the very end, there was a door. It was different from the others, heavier, with an old-fashioned brass handle. My fingers wrapped around it instinctively, but it wouldn't budge, locked. For a moment, I considered leaving it alone. I was already exhausted, and honestly, the place gave me the creeps. But then my wife's words echoed in my head again, "Grow a spine." I wasn't leaving without knowing what was behind that door. I dug through my bag and found a small screwdriver I'd thrown in at the last second before leaving the apartment. Kneeling down, I worked the old lock, the metal protesting with sharp clicks until finally it gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a room I swear I'd never seen before in my life. The air in there was colder, heavier. Dust covered everything, shelves lined with old books, stacks of wooden crates, a desk in the center. But what caught my eye first was an envelope lying neatly on the desk, like it had been waiting for me. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. I froze. It wasn't just the sight of my name on that envelope. It was the way the handwriting looked exactly like I remembered from when I was a kid. Bold, deliberate strokes, the kind my dad used when he signed permission slips or scrawled "Don't forget" notes on the fridge. My chest felt tight. My father had been gone for over a year, but in that moment, staring at that envelope, it felt like he was right there in the room with me, watching, waiting. I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I let my eyes wander around the space, every part of me buzzing with questions. The walls were lined with shelves, the wood dry and splintered with age. On them books sat in uneven rows, some leaning heavily against each other, their spines cracked and faded, others stacked haphazardly on top. A few titles caught my eye: thick leather, bound volumes with no names on them, just strange symbols etched into the covers. In the far corner, under a sheet so thick with dust it looked gray, something large loomed. I stepped closer, pulling the fabric away slowly, revealing an old trunk, metal corners dulled, lock rusted shut. My instincts told me there was more to this room than met the eye. The air was colder here, but not the kind of cold you get from a draft. It was the kind of cold that comes with stillness, the kind of cold that settles when something hasn't been touched in decades. I turned back toward the desk. The envelope sat exactly where it had been, like it hadn't shifted in years. My fingers hovered over it, trembling slightly. I thought about all the times I'd tried to talk to my father about how I felt about my brother, about always being the one left behind, and how he'd always brushed it off with a half-smile and ache. "That's just how life is, son." What could he possibly have to say to me now? Before I could open it, I noticed something else on the desk, a small, dust-covered glass jar. Sitting beside the envelope, inside was a folded piece of paper, and wrapped around it was a wedding ring. Not my mother's, I knew what hers looked like. This one was heavier, thicker, with strange engravings along the band. I reached out and picked it up, holding it under the weak light streaming through the narrow window. The carvings looked almost like coordinates. For a moment, the letter could wait. Ring felt like a breadcrumb, the first clue in a trail I didn't even know I'd been left. I slipped it into my pocket and took a slow step back, scanning the room one more time. The longer I stood there, the more it felt like every object was placed with intention, as if this wasn't just a forgotten room, but a message. The floorboards beneath the desk looked different, darker, more worn in. A rectangular shape, like they'd been lifted before. My pulse quickened. I glanced at the envelope again. My father's handwriting stared back at me, patient but heavy, and for the first time since I'd stepped into this house, I felt the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, not yet, curiosity. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge of the darker floorboards. Beneath the desk, the wood felt smoother there, like it had been handled more than the rest of the floor. I pressed lightly, testing it, and heard the faintest hollow sound. My stomach tightened. Wasn't like in the movies, there was no neat little latch to pull. Instead, I had to wedge my fingers into a narrow gap between two planks and lift. At first, nothing happened. The board groaned in protest as if it was determined to keep its secret buried. But with a slow, steady pull, it finally gave way, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside, a faint smell of cedar and something older. Like paper that had soaked up decades of air, drifted up. I reached in and felt around, my fingertips brushing against something hard. My heart pounded harder with every second. When I pulled it out, I found a small, rectangular tin box, the kind my grandfather used to keep cigars in. This one, though, was heavier than it looked. I set it on the desk, brushing away the dust, and saw that lid was sealed with a thin strip of wax, dark red, almost brown with age. Stamped into it was the same strange symbol I'd seen on the spine of one of those leather-bound books on the shelf. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I scanned the shelves again, my eyes lingering on that thick, nameless book. I pulled it down, coughing as a cloud of dust rose into the air. The cover was dry and cracking, but the weight of it was solid, like it had been made to last. I thumbed through the pages, not a single word in English. The writing looked older. Latin maybe every few pages. A drawing appeared, old maps, diagrams of buildings, and something that looked like a sketch of this very house. One of the drawings showed the layout of the house with an X marked exactly where I was standing now. Another showed a series of numbers, not page numbers, but something else. Coordinates, maybe. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked back at the desk, the envelope, the sealed tin box, the jar with the ring, and suddenly it didn't feel like I was alone. The silence pressed in harder, heavier. Every creak of the house made me glance over my shoulder. I thought about my father again, about the way he used to pause sometimes when looking at me, like he wanted to say something but stopped himself, like there was a truth he couldn't let slip. And here it was, sitting in front of me. I pulled the tin box closer, my hands shaking slightly, but then my eyes caught on something else. Behind the desk, almost hidden in the shadows, was a narrow wooden cabinet. The door was warped, the hinges rusted, but the lock was new, brand new. That meant someone had been here recently. The letter could wait. Now I had bigger questions. I grabbed the screwdriver again, my grip tighter this time. The cabinet door resisted at first, the metal of the new lock biting against the old wood, but I leaned my weight into it, twisting and prying until I heard the sharp snap of the mechanism giving way. The sound echoed in the stillness of the room, louder than I expected, like the house itself was aware I'd just broken into something I wasn't supposed to. The door swung open slowly, and a faint scent of oil and old metal drifted out. Inside, 3 shelves were crammed with items, but not the kind you'd expect in a forgotten Montana shack. On the top shelf sat a small, leather-bound journal, newer than the books on the wall. Its cover was scratched, as if it had been handled often. Next to it was an old brass compass, the glass face cracked but the needle still twitching faintly, like it couldn't decide which way to point. The second shelf held a wooden box, narrow and long, with deep gouges carved into its surface. The lid was partially open, revealing the smooth handle of what looked like a hunting knife, but older, almost ceremonial. The blade, when I slid it out, was engraved with the same strange markings I'd seen on the ring in my pocket. I was starting to feel like every new thing I touched tied back to some code, some design I didn't understand yet. The bottom shelf was the strangest. There was a canvas bag, stiff with age, and when I picked it up, something inside shifted with a dull clink. I untied the cord and tipped the bag forward, and a scattering of old coins tumbled onto the floor. They weren't like the coins you'd get from a collector's shop. These were heavy, darkened with age, the designs worn but still sharp enough to see unfamiliar crests and lettering I couldn't read. I turned one over in my palm, and for a split second I thought I heard something, the faint shuffle from somewhere deeper in the house. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the house settling. I told myself my pulse didn't slow. I gathered the coins back into the bag and set them on the desk beside the letter, the tin box, and the jar with the ring. All of it sat there in front of me like pieces of a puzzle dumped from a box, waiting for me to put them together. My father's handwriting on that envelope seemed to draw my eyes again, the way it had from the moment I saw it. It wasn't just a letter anymore, it was a key. But a key to what? I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the room pressing in around me, before finally pulling the envelope closer. I slipped my finger under the flap, the paper giving way with a soft tear. That's when I noticed it. The back of the envelope wasn't just sealed with glue. There was a faint, almost invisible smear of the same dark red wax I'd seen on the tin box. My father hadn't just sent me a letter. He'd sealed it like he was protecting a secret that someone else might try to get to first. And in that moment, one thought hit me hard, enough to stop me cold. What if my brother already knew about all of this? My hands were sweating by the time I broke the last of the wax. The flap lifted, releasing a faint, dry scent, that unmistakable smell of old paper that's been hidden away for years. Inside was a folded sheet, the edges yellowed, the creases worn soft from being opened and closed more than once. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the first few lines, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Son, it began in my father's steady, unmistakable handwriting. If you are reading this, it means you've come to the place I left for you. And it means you are finally ready to understand. The words seemed to tighten around me, pulling me deeper into the page. I know what you must be thinking, that your brother was given more, and you were left with less. I've watched that same thought haunt you since you were a boy. You believed I didn't see it, that I favored him. But the truth is more complicated. I swallowed hard. My father had never been the type to explain himself. Even when my mother pressed him about his decisions, he'd just shrug and walk away, but here, in these lines, he sounded different. Your brother was given the estate because it is what he understands, things that shine, things that show. But what I left you, it's more valuable than any house, any title. It is the root, not the branches. The heart, not the shell. I glanced at the desk, at the coins, the compass, the knife, the sealed tin box, and felt my pulse quicken. This house is older than you know. Older than I could tell you without putting you in danger. Beneath its floors, within its walls, are pieces of a history most have forgotten. I've guarded them for decades, but they no longer belong to me. They are yours now. My throat tightened as I read the next line. You may think I was hard on you, that I held you back. I needed you to grow into a man who could bear the weight of this, not a boy who would sell it for quick comfort. Your brother, he is not that man. The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't sure if I felt vindicated or betrayed. If you choose to walk away, no one will stop you. But if you choose to understand, truly understand, you will have to follow the signs I left. The first is in the box with the seal. Do not try to open it until you are alone, and until you are certain no one is watching. I stared at the tin box, my fingers twitching with the urge to tear it open right then. But the next part of the letter stopped me cold. If your brother comes here, trust nothing he says. He has already tried to find what you now hold. He will try again. A chill crawled up my spine. My father had died over a year ago, so how long had my brother been sniffing around here? This place will test you, son. Not just your courage, but your patience. Remember, some gifts don't look like gifts until you've earned them. I let the paper fall to the desk, my mind spinning. My brother had already been here. That meant I froze when I heard it. Sound came from somewhere beyond the hallway, faint but distinct, a floorboard creaking. I wasn't alone. I froze in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. The creak came again, louder this time, closer. Whoever it was, they weren't sneaking, they were careful, but deliberate. My hands hovered over the desk, over the envelope and the tin box, unsure whether to grab something for defense or stay completely still. The hallway outside the hidden room seemed impossibly long in that moment. Shadows stretched across the warped floorboards, bending with the weak light that came through the grimy windows. I swallowed, trying to steady my breath, listening. Every instinct screamed at me that this was the moment I had been preparing for, even if I hadn't realized it yet. Then I heard a voice, low, familiar, too familiar, looking for this. I spun around, and there he was, my brother, taller than I remembered, his face carrying that smug, confident expression that had haunted me since childhood. But now there was something else in his eyes, a sharp edge, a hunger I hadn't seen before. "Bro, what are you doing here?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, though my stomach had dropped. He stepped closer, eyes scanning the desk, lingering on the tin box and the envelope. "You really thought you could figure this out before me?" Dad left clues for both of us. "I just got here first." My pulse quickened, and anger surged through me, the kind I hadn't felt in years. "You think I don't remember how you always got everything handed to you? How you never had to fight for a damn thing?" He smirked. "Times change, you're here now, and so am I. Looks like we're finally on equal footing." I clenched my fists, my mind racing. The house, the hidden room, the letters, the box, the coins, my father's words echoing in my head, it all meant something, and if my brother tried to take it from me, it wouldn't just be a fight over property. It would be about proving I wasn't the weak one anymore. He stepped closer, glancing around as if calculating the best way to get to the treasures hidden in the room. "Don't think I can't just take it," he said casually, but I heard the challenge in his tone. Something in me snapped. For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I squared my shoulders, my hands steady, and met his gaze. "You won't." "Not this time?" The tension in the room thickened. Dust hung in the air like a fog, and the house seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, it wasn't just a confrontation between brothers. It was the culmination of years of resentment, disappointment, and unspoken truths. Then, without warning, he lunged for the tin box on the desk. I reacted instinctively, shoving it toward the edge and twisting just enough to block him. It clattered to the floor, metal scraping wood, and he froze, surprised by my sudden assertiveness. "You've been standing in the shadows your whole life," he said, eyes narrowing. "But you've changed." I felt a rush of adrenaline, realization dawning. My father hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me a test to see if I could stand up, fight for what was mine, and prove I had the patience and courage he always knew I had. And in that moment, something shifted. The fear, the doubt, the years of feeling second best, they all began to dissolve. I wasn't just the kid who got the shack. I was the one who had uncovered the truth. I took a deep breath, letting my pulse settle just enough to think clearly. My eyes flicked toward the tin box, still lying on the floor. It was small, unassuming, but I knew better now. Everything in this house, every hidden corner, every dusty object, was part of a puzzle my father had left me to solve. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up the box. The metal was cold under my fingers, the wax seal long dried but still holding firm. My brother watched, tense, his arms slightly raised like he expected me to make the first mistake. I set the box on the desk and traced the symbol stamped into the wax with my fingertip. It was the same as the ring in the jar, the same as the carvings on the knife, the same symbol I had seen in the sketches in the old book. A pattern, a key, something that connected all of these pieces together. I remembered my father's words from the letter. "Do not try to open it until you are alone and until you are certain no one is watching." My brother shifted, and I felt a surge of defiance. "I don't need his permission anymore. I'm ready." With careful hands, I broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle of envelopes and documents, tied together with a thin leather cord. I untied it slowly, revealing deeds, old letters, and maps of the surrounding land. Some marked with strange symbols and numbers I didn't recognize at first. I pulled one of the envelopes out and opened it. It contained a single key, small and heavy, with the same symbol etched into the bow. A map had been folded around it, showing the layout of the property I now stood on, not just the shack, but the surrounding land, hundreds of acres of forests, rivers, and hills. And at the center, marked clearly with a large X, was the location of something hidden. I glanced at my brother. His smug expression faltered when he realized I had found the first clue without him, and for the first time I didn't feel like the weaker one. This is the real inheritance," I said, my voice steady. "Not the house, not the money. This is what Dad wanted me to find. He left it here for a reason." My brother's jaw tightened. So all this time, you were the one he trusted. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could feel it, the weight of responsibility, the thrill of discovery, the pride that came from finally standing on my own. I started piecing together the maps. The key, the letters. The clues all pointed to a hidden cellar beneath the shack, covered by a false floor. My father had hidden the real legacy in a place that looked worthless, knowing that only someone patient and determined enough could uncover it. Sweat ran down my back as I pushed aside the old rug and pried up the floorboards. A dark opening stared back at me, deep and narrow, the air cool and musty. I lowered myself down, heart pounding. Inside the cellar were more treasures than I could have imagined, stacks of old coins, antique furniture, documents proving ownership of vast land, and a small chest. The chest was locked, but the key from the envelope fit perfectly. I turned it, and the lid creaked open. Inside lay more coins, rare collectibles, and a series of sealed letters addressed to me, my father's final words to his youngest son, the one he had waited for, the one who had finally proved he was ready. I sat there for a long moment, taking it all in. I had inherited more than a house. I had inherited my father's trust, the real family legacy, and most importantly, the knowledge that I was capable of standing on my own. I looked at my brother, still at the top of the stairs. This isn't about money, I said. This is about understanding what matters. And you weren't ready. His face hardened, but I could see the realization in his eyes. For once, the tables had turned. I stepped out of the cellar into the fading Montana light, the weight of the letters and treasures in my arms. The shack didn't look like much from the outside, just a small, crumbling house in the middle of nowhere, but I knew better. This was the place where I became the man I was meant to be, where I finally stood up for myself, where I discovered that the real inheritance isn't always what it looks like at first glance. And as I looked across the rolling hills and endless forests that my father had entrusted to me, I realized something else. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as nothing at all. I stepped out onto the porch, the Montana wind biting at my face, and I finally allowed myself to take a deep breath. The shack looked even smaller now that I knew what it truly held, but to me it was larger than life. Every creak of floorboards, every peeling strip of paint suddenly felt like a badge of honor, a mark that I had earned what no one else could have. I sat down on the old wooden steps. The letters from my father spread across my lap. One by one, I read them again, committing every word to memory. He had written about patience, resilience, and courage, about how he had watched me quietly, knowing I had the strength, but needed to discover it myself. His faith in me, even when I doubted myself, made my chest tighten with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The wind carried a faint sound of movement behind me. I turned slowly, expecting my brother to emerge from the house, angry, ready for confrontation, but he didn't come. I realized he had left, probably to think, maybe to recognize for the first time that life isn't just about appearances or immediate victories. I thought about my wife, too, how she had kicked me out, saying I was weak, how her anger had pushed me toward this journey I didn't even know I was capable of. Part of me felt a sting of bitterness, but another part was grateful. Without that push, I might never have discovered this secret, this hidden inheritance, or even myself. I stood and walked around the small yard, brushing my hand against the rough wood of the railing. The trees swayed gently, their shadows stretching across the ground. The house had been a test, and I had passed. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Some gifts don't look like gifts until you've earned them. I imagined the future, possibilities unfolding before me like the maps my father had left behind. I could renovate the shack, expand the land, start something of my own. The estate my brother had inherited didn't matter anymore. This was mine, not just in ownership, but in meaning. I sat back down and opened the last letter. My father's final words were simple, yet profound. Son, remember this always. Strength isn't measured by what you take, but by what you hold on to. Not money, not land, but your courage, your integrity, and your heart. You have proven yourself ready. Now go and live the life I always knew you could. A warmth spread through me, a mix of grief, pride, and a fierce determination. For the first time, I felt whole, the boy who had always been left Behind was gone. In his place stood a man who had fought, endured, and finally earned his place in the world. I looked around the Montana landscape, the sun now dipping low, casting golden light over the rolling hills. This shack, once a symbol of failure, had become my sanctuary, my proving ground, my inheritance in every sense that truly mattered. I would rebuild it, yes, but not just the house. My life, my independence, my confidence, my ability to stand alone. I knew my brother might resent it. My wife might regret leaving, but it didn't matter. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me and what I had discovered in a crumbling house in the middle of nowhere. And as I sat there, letters in hand, looking out over the endless horizon, I smiled for the first time in years, not because I had money or land or power, but because I had finally found myself. Sometimes the greatest lessons, the most valuable inheritances, come in the least expected forms, and sometimes you have to be left with nothing to discover everything. I woke the next morning to a pale Montana sunrise spilling through the grimy windows. The shack looked almost peaceful in the soft light, its flaws softened by the warm glow. I stepped outside, the air crisp and clean, and let myself breathe deeply. For the first time, the cold didn't bite, it invigorated me. I walked the property, following the maps my father had left behind. Each marker, each symbol, told a story, hidden paths, old foundations, small landmarks that had been part of this land long before my parents owned it. It wasn't just property, it was history waiting to be uncovered, and now I was the one in charge of it. Over the next few weeks, I started the work of reclaiming the shack. I patched the roof, replaced broken boards, and cleared out decades of dust and debris. Every swing of the hammer, every nail I drove, was a reminder of what I had endured to get here. Each repair was more than maintenance, it was a symbol of the man I was becoming. I also began to follow the hidden clues on the property. Beneath an old oak, I found a buried tin, more coins, more letters, and a small wooden box containing a compass similar to the one I had discovered inside. It was as if my father had created a treasure hunt designed to teach me patience, attention to detail, and persistence. Every discovery brought a mix of exhilaration and reflection. I thought about my brother, how easy his life had seemed, how I had always measured myself against him, and realized that what I had gained here was far more valuable than anything he could have inherited. My father's letters continued to guide me. One morning, I found one tucked into a hollow of an old tree near the creek. Read, son, life is not about fairness. It is about courage. It is about what you do when the world doesn't hand you what you think you deserve. Stand strong and you will find your own path. The words resonated deeply. For so long I had felt powerless, trapped in my role as the overlooked son. But now I was empowered not by wealth or inheritance, but by experience, by struggle, by proving to myself that I could rise above everything that had held me back. Neighbors, few as they were in this remote corner of Montana, began to notice the changes. They saw the old shack slowly transforming, and I could sense a new respect in their eyes. For the first time, I felt a sense of community, of belonging. I was no longer just a visitor in this life, I was its steward, and with each passing day, I also healed. I wrote to my wife, not with anger, but with honesty. I told her about what I had discovered, what I had become, and why I could never go back to being the man I once was. Some doors closed forever, but I understood now that the right doors, the ones that mattered, were the ones I opened for myself. By the time summer rolled in, the shack had been transformed. It was still humble, still simple, but it carried weight, the weight of earned victories, hard lessons, and the legacy my father had entrusted to me. Standing on the porch, looking out at the land stretching endlessly into the horizon, I finally understood something I had never grasped before. Inheritance isn't always about what is given to you. Sometimes it is about what you discover when you are forced to stand on your own, when you are left with nothing but yourself. I had been given a crumbling house, and in it I had found everything. As the seasons changed, I settled into a rhythm I had never known in the city. Mornings began with the sun spilling over the hills, and evenings ended with the stars so bright it felt like the whole universe was leaning close to listen. The shack, once a symbol of rejection, had become my sanctuary. Every crack in the floor, every worn beam, reminded me of the journey I had taken, of the boy I once was, and the man I had become. I explored the land methodically, uncovering more hidden caches my father had left. Coins, letters, journals, each one a piece of the story he had built for me. Teaching lessons in patience, observation, and resilience. The compass, the maps, even the knife, they weren't just tools or treasures. They were reminders that my father had believed in me long before I believed in myself. Occasionally I thought of my brother. I imagined him walking through the estate he had inherited, still living the life I had once envied. But the envy I once felt was gone. I realized that life isn't a competition. It's about understanding your own path, embracing it, and walking it with courage. I had finally found mine. I also thought of my wife. I knew some relationships couldn't survive the truths we uncover about ourselves, and ours had changed irreversibly. But I forgave her and myself for the mistakes we had made. That forgiveness freed me more than anything else. One afternoon, as I restored an old shed near the creek, I uncovered a chest buried under a thin layer of soil. It was filled with family heirlooms, gold coins, and old documents that traced generations of our lineage. My father's voice echoed in my mind as I held the objects in my hands. Not what is given, but what is earned, defines you. I realized that this inheritance was never meant to make me rich or powerful. It was meant to teach me strength, patience, and self-worth. It was about turning a crumbling house into a foundation for life, both literally and metaphorically. Months passed, and I transformed the shack into a home, not a mansion, but a place filled with purpose, history, and personal triumph. Neighbors began stopping by, curious about the changes, impressed by what I had accomplished. Children played along the creek, families picnicked under the trees, and I finally felt a sense of belonging I had never known in the city. One evening, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, I understood the final lesson my father had left me. Life doesn't hand you what you think you deserve, it tests you. It forces you to fight, to grow, to discover what truly matters. And in doing so, it gives you far more than wealth or property. It gives you yourself. I looked at the horizon, the Montana wind ruffling my hair, and smiled. I had inherited more than a house. I had inherited the courage to stand, the wisdom to see, and the heart to persevere. The boy who felt overlooked, abandoned, and weak was gone. In his place stood a man who had faced the shadows, uncovered the hidden truth, and claimed his life on his own terms. And in that moment, I knew no matter what the world handed me, I would always be ready. Because sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as nothing at all. And sometimes you have to be left with nothing to discover everything. I watched the last rays of sunlight fade behind the hills, the sky painted in shades of gold and deep crimson. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, carrying with it a quiet kind of peace I had never known. I sat on the porch, letters and maps laid out before me, and let myself reflect on the journey that had brought me here. It wasn't just the house, or the land, or even the hidden treasures my father had left. It was everything I had learned along the way about patience, resilience, and courage, about standing alone when it felt like the world had left me behind, about trusting myself even when others doubted me. I thought of my brother, my wife, my parents. Each had played a role in shaping the man I had become. Painful moments, harsh words, and even betrayal had pushed me to rise. I realized now that life's hardships aren't punishments, they are lessons disguised as trials, shaping us into the people we are meant to be. As I closed the last envelope from my father, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for gold or the land, but for the trust he had placed in me, for the wisdom he had hidden in plain sight, for the faith that I could grow stronger through struggle, that I could discover my own strength. In a crumbling house he had left me to inherit, the shack no longer felt small or broken. It was a monument to my growth, a symbol of perseverance, and a reminder that the value of life is measured not by what you are given, but by what you do with it. Every nail I hammered, every floorboard I repaired, every clue I uncovered had been a step toward becoming the man I was always meant to be. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the wind sweep over me. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the quiet heartbeat of a land that had waited patiently for me. understand its worth, and I understood the true inheritance my father had left was far greater than anything money could buy. It was courage, it was wisdom, it was the knowledge that even when life seems unfair, even when you are left with nothing, you have the power to claim everything that truly matters. I smiled, feeling a peace I had never known. The boy who had been overlooked, abandoned, and doubted was gone. In his place stood a man who had faced the shadows, uncovered the hidden truths, and claimed his life on his own terms. And as the stars began to appear in the Montana sky, I made a quiet promise to myself to honor the lessons, to protect the inheritance, and to live boldly, no longer afraid of being left behind. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as nothing at all, and sometimes you have to be left with nothing to discover everything. This was my inheritance, my legacy, and my life.